In line with the McEwen oil spot strategy, through which politically compliant communities were rewarded, the state made available millions of rents for upgrading Crossroads. Mayors Ngcobongwane and Hosa were able to consolidate their control of their camps in conjunction with the local authorities, the Crossroad Town Council and the Lingeletu West Town Council in Khayelitsha respectively. These areas were to remain sealed to the resistance movements until the end of the decade, although elements of opposition in Khayelitsha did exist, as mayors Ngcobongwane and Hosa were able to draw upon the resources of the town council to extend their patronage base. These two leaders were able to run these areas as virtual private fiefdoms, establishing an extensive network of control through financial extractions and informal judicial control of the population. The Amasolomzi community police established a brutal reputation, being linked to numerous violations. In the second half of 1988, numerous urgent interdicts were applied for in the Supreme Court against Hosa and his Amasolomzi by Khayelitsha residents, particularly those linked to the Joint Action Committee, a body which threatened Hosa's political supremacy in the area. The statement of Fumbanati Sidwell Mcabangeli gave a picture of the situation after he and several others laid charges about the beatings and torture that took place in the jail. He was again beaten and held at the jail. The actions of the Amasolomzi and the informal courts were both supported and encouraged by the local authorities and security forces as tribal courts aimed at keeping law and order. People's courts, run by comrades, however, were vigorously crushed, and the comrades charged with inciting people to rebel against the state. Political challenges or threats were not tolerated by Hosa Ngcobongwane, leading to several incidents of violence. In Khayelitsha, the Joint Action Committee, a body opposed to Hosa, was subjected to ongoing harassment and attack by Hosa and his group. In Crossroads, Prince Gobinca, a former Veduke leader, fell out of favor and was violently ejected from Crossroads in July 1987. Gobinca himself was shot and injured, and up to 30 homes of his supporters in Crossroads were torched, driving out these potential opponents. During the campaign by the resistance movements against the 1989 whites-only elections, conflicts between Hosa, Gobinca, and Jerry Tutu erupted in violence, leading to the elimination of at least 5 people. The state strategy of contra-mobilization sought both to build anti-liberation movement forces by covert means and to foster divisions within communities. In the Western Cape, the social divisions between the more traditionalist sectors of African townships in hostels and squatter camps and the more permanent township dwellers offered the potential for successful contra-mobilization. From 1986 onwards, the state poured resources into those sectors of the townships that were prepared to adopt a pro-government stance. Illegal actions committed by these groups were permitted, ignored, and promoted, particularly if they targeted supporters of the liberation movements. The repeated conflicts in the squatter areas of Cape Town in the 1980s have their roots in the state's colored labor preference policy, which resulted in rigorous influx control, pass law prosecutions, and squatter camp removals. The discrimination between Africans with legal and permanent residence in Cape Town and those deemed illegal and living mainly in hostels and squatter camps created the environment for conflict that tore communities apart. It also led to a very fragmented and divided civic movement in the peninsula. 3 conflicts in Cape Town's informal settlements reflects different aspects of the state's practice of contra-mobilization in this region. The conflict between the Veduke, fathers, and the comrades from December 1985 to June 1986, abuses committed by former Veduke leaders in Khayelitsha and Old Crossroads from 1986 to 1989, interventions of an internal split within KTC squatter camp in 1987 to 1988.
The first wave of horror came in May 1986. Over 3 days, the fathers of Veduka systematically burnt 3 satellite squatter camps around Crossroads to the ground. The security forces then stepped in. They encircled the area with barbed wire to prevent the 30,000 left homeless by the attack from reoccupying the land.
Crossroads Squatter Camp was first settled in 1975 and grew rapidly after 1977 as homes in other areas were bulldozed by the state. In Crossroads, residents faced eviction orders and repeated police raids in the state's ongoing efforts to remove the camp. After a major local and international Save Crossroads campaign, the Minister of Cooperation and Development, Pete Konoff, granted a temporary reprieve in 1979. In addition, an agreement was reached to build a new township for many Crossroads residents, to be known as New Crossroads. Most squatter camps develop complex structures of internal organization, an executive committee with headmen who would also run courts and community police. Forms of taxation for access to sites became standards as leaders came to depend on financial contributions from residents for a range of issues: funerals, legal fees, and community structures such as creches. Conflict over political control over these finances was common, resulting in breakaway groups. The fierce struggle with the state facilitated the emergence of powerful leaders as protectors and patrons of squatters. In Old Crossroads, a pattern of authoritarian leadership was entrenched under Johnson Ngcobongwana. Links to the UDF and other organizations in the former townships remained largely symbolic, as leaders tended to be preoccupied with internal squatter issues. The political relationship was also weakened by long-standing divisions between legal township residents and the migrants, Amagoduka, who were based in the hostels and squatter camps. During the course of 1985, Crossroads leader Johnson Ngcobongwana increasingly distanced himself from the UDF. It was widely speculated that he had switched allegiance to the state and its security forces while in prison, awaiting trial on charges on which he was later acquitted. The first open conflict between the comrades and the old guard, or fathers, later called Vetduke after their distinguishing white headcloths, occurred towards the end of December 1985, spilling over into the new year as groups of fathers rampaged through New Crossroads, attacking activists. At least 7 people were eliminated and many injured on both sides. Hundreds of activists fled the area. Allegations of police encouraging and escorting the fathers on their raids were made in the media at the time and in statements to the commission. During the conflict, Vetduke leader Prince Gobinca rose to prominence. Gobinca was a source for both the security branch and military intelligence as from an unspecified date in the 1980s. The first 6 months of 1986 were marked by sporadic ongoing skirmishes and conflicts between Ngcobongwana's supporters and areas or activists aligned with the UDF. Although Vetduke stated that they were resisting the militant practices of the comrades, such as necklacing and people's courts, they were victims of necklacing and burning on both sides of the conflict. In addition, it was widely known that Crossroads itself operated systems of informal justice and prisons.
These men asked if we could see the Red Sea. This here is the Red Sea. We looked at it, and when we looked, we saw the heads of people. The necks were severed from the body. The heads were on the one side, and the bodies on the other side. They were floating in the water. They said the best thing was to take us to Ngcobongwana. Ngcobongwana is the one who is going to explain what to do about them. Let us take them to Ngcobongwana. We went up with them and took off the tires. They took the tires and said, let us go to Ngcobongwana. Some said, let's go to Pollsmoor. They must be taken to Pollsmoor.
Legal support bodies at the time took numerous affidavits from those held and harshly beaten in one such prison. While the people's courts on the comrades' side were repeatedly raided by police, the Vetduke courts and prison remained untouched or even protected and defended by forces of law and order. Subsequent police investigations led to charges being laid against Ngcobongwana regarding the operation of this court. Police official Leonard Knipe testified to the commission that he was instructed by his senior to ensure Ngobongwane's release on bail on orders from the top.
In the early afternoon of the same day that Nokonwana appeared in court, I received a telephone call from an agitated Brigadier van der Westhuizen. I obviously no longer can remember the exact conversation between the Brigadier and myself, but the impression was that he had been severely rebuked because of our actions against Mr. Nokonwana, and that he had been instructed by either the State President or Minister to see to it that Nokonwana was released on bail. I was informed that the authorities were fully conversant with Nokonwana's court, that it was not a people's court but a tribal court. I was instructed to immediately see to it that Nokonwana was released on bail.
Squatter camps were posing a major security threat at the time, with regular sniper attacks on police or army vehicles, mainly from the direction of all Crossroads satellite camps and KTC. Hand grenade attacks also strongly indicated the presence of trained guerrillas. This seems to have led to a convergence of interest with the Wetduke, the security forces, and local government agencies wanting to upgrade the original Crossroads area, rid the settlements of comrades, and eliminate security threats faced by the police. The commission uncovered evidence of covert official endorsement of and support to the Wetduke. Documentary evidence links the Western Province Joint Management Center, Western Province Command of the SADF, and senior SEB personnel at provincial level to this endorsement. More significantly, this local level of support was endorsed by the highest security structure in the country, the State Security Council. The subsequent court case against the Minister of Law and Order points to a high-level expensive cover-up of these acts. On 10 January 1986, shortly after the first mass attack by the Wetduke, Fathers of Crossroads, or New Crossroads, the JMC chairperson, Brigadier Ek de Jager, stated that the actions of the old guard deserve support, though this should occur in a covert manner. In March 1986, General One Drug's office sent out guidelines for managing unrest, describing contra-mobilization as follows. Efforts must be made to get the residents of black areas motivated to resist revolutionaries as follows. Contra-mobilization must be small-scale and implemented at regional level. Positive resistance movements must be encouraged. This must be done clandestinely. A sub-JMC meeting in the Western Cape noted that SADF Western Province Command is already working in this direction to get the fathers to resist the comrades. During March 1986, the JMCs were tasked with drawing up plans to deal with unrest and trouble spots. The final plan presented to the State Security Council on 14 April 1986 specified the following for the Western Cape. Goal: to remove the influence of comrades and other activists on the community. Task: to support well-disposed, moderate blacks. Actions: covert organizing of adult law-abiding black men, fathers, to go against the comrades in their terror campaign against the residents of black areas. The SSC meeting included the President, P.W. Botha, General Magnus Malan, Adrian Flock, and Rolf Meyer. The meeting was also attended by Neil Barnard and the Commissioner of Police, General P.J. Coetzee, who was to later testify at the trial. On 24 April 1986, a meeting was held at Athlone SEB District Commissioner's office between Wetduke leaders and members of the SEB. Brigadier Stridom promised to take their case to the Commissioner of Police and to the Minister of Law and Order. Chief Wetduke leader Sam Dima testified to the commission that follow-up meetings included various men from Pretoria who, in his understanding, gave permission for the Wetduke to take action. One man described himself as the secretary of chairman in Pretoria. Ndima also alleged that two sharpshooters, Warrant Officer Barnard and Captain Luke, were allocated to assist them. Video footage exists of Luke running with a group of Wetduke, shooting at the comrades, and of members of his unit graciously greeting Wetduke. Captain Luke denied this in a Commission Section 29 hearing. would be achieved. Between 17 and 21 May 1986, thousands of Wetduke from all crossroads systematically torched and looted the satellite squatter camps of Nyanga Bush, Nyanga Extension, and Portland Cement. Both SEP and SADF personnel were present at the scene, and not a single Wetduke member was arrested. Around 38 people were eliminated in incidents associated with this first attack, and many others injured. An estimated 30,000 people were made homeless. The security forces then encircled the area with barbed wire to keep its former residents out. On 21 May, the Western Province JMC reported to the Secretariat of the State Security Council. The fathers are well disposed towards the security forces and want law and order. Fathers cannot be openly supported due to the hostility of the leftist press. When it became apparent that KTC was facing a similar threat of destruction by the Wetduke, the Legal Resources Center applied for an urgent Supreme Court interdict against the police and Wetduke, restraining them from unlawfully entering KTC and destroying the camp. A temporary interdict was granted on 26 May, restraining the SEP from participating in, assisting in, encouraging, permitting, or allowing any unlawful attack upon any person or property residing within or situated within the area known as KTC. It also directed the security forces to take all reasonable necessary steps within their powers to prevent any member of the SEP or the SADF or any other person from perpetrating any of the acts mentioned. Despite this interdict, thousands of Wetduke assembled outside the Development Board offices next to Crossroads on the morning of Monday 9 June and moved off in groups to attack. Over 3 days, KTC was systematically set alight and destroyed. Each morning, the Wetduke would gather, march to KTC, and engage in attacks, arson, and looting. Not one Wetduke was arrested during the entire attack, although several journalists were arrested and removed from the area. Scores of affidavits from clergy, journalists, and residents on the scene described Caspia as escorting Wetduke and reported other incidents indicating complicity. Approximately 20 people were eliminated in the second attack, and a further 30,000 people made homeless. A total of over 65 persons were eliminated in the 2 attacks, and up to 60,000 were made homeless. On the morning of the start of the Wetduke attack on KTC, the Western Province JMC arranged a flight on an SADF aircraft for 2 Wetduke leading the attack, Enrique Shelhasi and Mr. Graham Lawrence from the Development Board to consult Ngobongwana, then in Ciskei. The flight request details were sent to the Secretariat of the State Security Council. 5 hours after the start of the attack on KTC, the Western Province JMC sent the Secretariat of the State Security Council in Pretoria a signal message stating that, in order to prevent the stay-away actions on 16 June, a gathering of Wetduke in Crossroads has been planned, during which the message to go to work will be conveyed to the masses. This action will be in a victory feast in the form of a cattle slaughter. The costs have not yet been finalized, but can be estimated at about 3,000 rands and would be appreciated if the necessary funds could be made available. Finalization will not be reached until 11 June, when you will be contacted again. The document clearly supports and endorses the group engaged in arson and killing. It should be noted that the attack on KTC ended on 11 June 1986, the date on which finalization would be achieved. KTC residents instructed the LRC to sue the Minister of Law and Order for damages sustained during the attacks. The Supreme Court damages claim was on behalf of 21 parties whose respective claims exceeded 10,000 rands. It was alleged that members of the SEP had made a common cause and assisted the persons from all crossroads in destroying, damaging, and causing the loss of the said dwellings and property. Alternatively, they had failed to take reasonable steps to prevent the destruction of KTC. The Minister of Law and Order denied these allegations. Throughout the case, all defense witnesses representing the state consistently denied any involvement in the attacks or support to the Wetduke. The Commissioner of Police, General Johan Coetzee, testified that the police were trained to be impartial and it was not in the culture of the SAP to take sides or engage in illegal actions. Despite these denials, the state took the highly unusual step of issuing Section 66 notices, barring access to evidence requested by the LRC. 5 Section 66 certificates were issued by 3 ministers. They were signed by Minister of Law and Order, Adrian Vlok, one by Minister of Defense, Magnus Malan, and one by Deputy Minister of Law and Order, Rolf Meyer. The case ran from September 1987 to June 1989 and was settled out of court in February 1990 by the withdrawal of the action and allegations set out in the claim. Thus, there was no judgment or no court decision.